Now, the Israeli military is continuing its offensive in southern Gaza, despite international calls for the operation to be halted to prevent the loss of more civilian lives. As the operation in Rafah pushed ahead, the Israeli army announced that 3 of its soldiers had been killed. It added that 3 other soldiers were badly wounded in the same incident, but gave no further details. It comes as reports from Rafah say that Israel carried out fresh strikes this morning. The White House has said that Israel's operation in Rafah doesn't cross its red lines. A spokesman, John Kirby, said the US does not believe that Israel has launched a full-scale invasion of Rafah, and as such, US policy would not change. Meanwhile, Algeria says it's drafting a new UN resolution calling for an end to the killing. The US has vetoed previous resolutions. Well, for the latest developments, I'm joined now by Arise International correspondent Faith Orr. Good to see you, Faith. And just by way of updating people, Brazil has apparently withdrawn its ambassador from Israel in protest at the killings. And we heard the Israeli National Security Advisor Tzahi Hanegbi saying he expects fighting in Gaza to continue for the rest of this year and possibly into 2025. I mean, I imagine that the idea that this war could go on for at least another 7 months will worry many people in Israel, Gaza, and outside.
Yes, what he said was he expected the fighting could continue at least through 2024. So, yeah, I mean, possibly into next year. It's hard to say. Israel certainly showing no signs of slowing. You know, the tanks continue to roll into Rafah, the fighting continues, the attacks continue. We've seen more attacks on the Al-Mawasi, the designated safe zone today. Another 20 or so people killed there. Attacks Deir al-Balah in the centre of Gaza too, just across the strip. These are continuing. So certainly no sign of an end to this fighting anytime soon. His comments, of course, not welcomed by the international community who want to see an end to this war. The sooner the better. Another 30 countries have joined in calls for an investigation into Israel's systematic dismantling of Gaza's health centres, health facilities. So it's not being received well, but the war does continue and will throughout the year, we expect.
And of course, you mentioned there that, you know, beyond sort of Israeli airstrikes on Rafah, Israeli tanks and troops reportedly mounting raids in the eastern center of Rafah. But after those raids, the tanks and troops apparently retreated to positions at the border. Could this be why the Americans are saying that the operation falls short of being a major ground offensive, which could trigger a change in US policy?
The US, John Kirby, he had some quite technical details which he said it's not like they're going in formation, you know, rolling in with the columns of tanks. I mean, what he's describing is what you would see from kind of between Russia and Ukraine, 2 huge armies. For them to do that in Rafah, in a tiny little city, would frankly be overkill. Israel's not going to roll in like that. So if that's his bar for a full-scale ground invasion, you can have a full-scale ground invasion without having columns of troops and tanks. You know, it's not necessary. And he says that until that happens, the US won't change its policy. The US, of course, has been calling for the protection of civilians in Rafah. They wanted a plan for those people to get out. We think there's still about 500,000 people there, so certainly a lot of potential for civilian casualties. Interestingly, the attack that happened Sunday night, Monday morning, which killed about 45 people, was a US bomb that was dropped. It was one of their missiles. So the US very much still supplying the weapons for this assault on Rafah.
Meanwhile, Algeria saying it's drafting a UN resolution calling for an end to the killing. What can you tell us about that, and what difference it could make, given that the US has vetoed previous resolutions?
It's not going to make any difference. The US is going to veto it. We heard from the US ambassador walking into the Security Council meeting that they have no plans to let this pass. Algeria has drafted this resolution. They want there to be a ceasefire in Gaza, an end to the operations in Rafah, and importantly, for previous UN Security Council resolutions to be upheld, which demanded the access of aid, so the Rafah crossing, for instance, to be reopened. opened and aid to be shipped back in to Gaza, the US is going to say no, and that'll be that.
Faith, thanks very much indeed. Faith Orr is Arise international correspondent.